the name of the training today, or the name of the Cadre, is least restrictive environment. And of course, we said you could shorten that to LRE if you so desire. Again, least restrictive environment, new emerging teacher Cadre. It's the last installment, May 11, 2022. We always talk about, and of course, this topic is one of the big 6 pieces that come in there under the ideal law. You got things like procedural safeguards, and you have free appropriate public education, and you have the right to have an IEP, and the right to have an independent evaluation, have an evaluation that's appropriate for you, and all those good things. But least restrictive environment is a huge concept here that kind of pieces everything together. And so anytime we do anything with compliance, we always try to model good teaching. And so one of the things we always do is we talk about targets. And so we just kind of put this around guiding questions. These are kind of some of the things kind of frame our discussion today. And then we're going to go right into an activity. But what is the least restrictive environment? What does the law say about LRE? Now, we're an acronyms industry. You got to know your acronyms. If you're a professional educator and you're in special education, I can't tell you how important it is that you lock into the language, that you know what the language means. We cannot be professionals if we don't understand our language. I lived in a household where my father was a railroader and they had their own language. We have our own language here in special education, and education is, especially special education, has a ton of word salad and a ton of just words that mean things, and least restrictive environment, LRE, is one of those. So what are supplementary aids and services? Again, we talk about SAS sometimes, we shorten that. And then what is the continuum placement options that must be available in a district? And how does that all work? How does this all apply to the IEP? So that's going to kind of frame our discussion today. So what we want to do right now is we want you, the practitioner, the teacher out there, all you participants, to take 2 or 3 minutes just to think about that phrase, least restrictive environment. And then we would like you just to jot. So we're doing a little quick think and jot. We're going to do a waterfall. So we don't want you to put this into the chat prematurely. We want you to wait for the countdown. We're in about 5 minutes, we're going to say, okay, let's put our answers in. I'm going to count 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you're going to put your answers in the chat. We're going to look at those, and then we'll jump into a little bit of discussion, a little bit of learning, possibly. And maybe everybody's got it. Everybody knows what it is. Everybody knows how it applies. And if that is the case, then it's going to be a refresher for you. All right, so let's take just a minute. Okay, so we're doing a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Place that in your chat. Kim says it's a space where everyone is welcome to think, ask questions, or collaborate when they need to in order to learn. Alice Lycan says special education students should be in the same classroom as other students as much as possible. It's not a place, it's a principle. LRE is different for each person because each person is unique. Very good. Very good. Being in the classroom and general education classroom as much as possible with the same age peer, and will look differently for each student. Steph Kidd says LRE is the best possible placement for a student to acquire skills, understand and communicate their needs, along with best social environment based on the student's needs. And Chas Craft says the learning environment that provides the most access to the general curriculum that is appropriate for the student, and then the appropriate setting for the student to learn within to have their needs and abilities met. Space where a particular child performs at peak. All great answers. Thank you all so much. And so we're ready to go on to the next slide. So let's just take a second here and access the guidance document, if you will. And if you don't fool with the guidance document much, you probably should as a special education professional. And on page 2 there, Steph, you can just click on least restrictive environments down there at page 60 or 58. I'm sorry, 58. One up. There you go. And yeah, just kind of pull that up there. And we have right there I guess the definition from the regulation. So LRE means that to the maximum extent appropriate students with disabilities are educated with students who are non-disabled. That's basically what it comes down to. So there's a lot more to it than that, though. And, special classes, separate schools, or removal from the general ed environment occurs only if education in the general education environment with the use of supplementary aids and services cannot be satisfactorily achieved due to the nature and severity of the disability. So what that means in layman's terms or in real terms is that every student is unique. We have to meet those students where they are, and we have to attempt to get them in a place where their education is being delivered that's appropriate for them. It is to the maximum extent appropriate with students that are non-disabled, students who do not have a disability. So, you have seen this play out in school. A few years back, there was a huge push to go to inclusion and to push students in away from resource rooms. But what I'm going to tell you now is that as you read on down through that definition, you're going to see that special classes, separate schools, or removal from the general education only occurs if we consider regular ed first, but we also have to have those options open. We can't presuppose. We can't say everybody's going to get co-teaching in the regular classroom. We can't say everybody's going to go to the resource room. We've got to have options and flexibility driven by the student's needs. And so as we go on down the page there, the ARC must consider the continuum of placement options, instruction in general ed with co-teaching. Okay, now obviously they're going to need some services, so you can't just have them in regular ed with nothing. Okay, but if they have an IEP, there's a need for specially designed instruction, and there's an adverse effect on their educational performance from the disability. And one of the things that I see when I'm out there working in the schools is that I see that the disability sometimes can be disconnected from the paperwork. So we get a kid that's disabled as a behavior student, let's say. Maybe they're in the OHI category, and we just focus on the academic piece. The IEP is twofold and sometimes threefold, depending on the student's age. And one of the things that we have to really, really focus on is making sure that we've got them in the appropriate placement and that we're providing access to the general curriculum, but we also have them in a place that's going to meet their needs, because the needs of the IEP drives the decisions that we make. So it says on down the page, down to LRE decisions are based on student need. About middle ways of the page there, the student's expected outcomes and the educational program. The ARC discusses placement for delivery of IEP services and documents the LRC decision in 5 places. Okay, in the LRE section on the IEP, and we're going to look at some screenshots later. It also is in the IEP special education services section. So when you write that statement, and we're going to look at what page 60 says about this in a minute. When you write that statement, you have to, this is one of the things that trip people up when they're audited. You write that statement and then it doesn't match in the services page. So whatever you write up here, you've got to have it match. And then there's the related services section, which I always leave out. I always say it has to match in 4 places. I kind of clump those services sections together. And then you got your conference summary placement options and decisions section. Now, when you're thinking about this, you're proposing that a student's eligible. You're proposing that a student be placed in a particular location. And you're saying that the needs are saying, even with the use of supplementary aids and services, the student still needs specially designed instruction, delivery of service. Okay. And then the other place that sometimes we forget is, as you restrict the environment, as you move down the continuum of placement options, you've exhausted regular ed, you've exhausted regular ed co-teaching, you've exhausted resource, you've exhausted all of those things. You have to consider potential harm on the student, because there's things like access to the general education teaching environment, access to socialization with non-disabled peers. There's all kinds of things that can potentially be harmful. So as you move down that placement, like if you're working with a student that's in the special needs classroom all day long, if they're in the resource all day long, that's more restrictive than if they were in the regular ed with co-teaching. So we need to start to think and consider. Now, when we get down there to like a residential facility or a correctional facility, that's going to have a ton of impact on whether or not there's potential harm. Think about being in the special needs classroom for the majority of the day and not having much interaction, and how that limits your view of the world, and how that limits your interaction and your development of functional skills. So you've got to plan for that, and you got to talk about that. So those 5 places, it has to match. And you can go on down, Steph, and we can take a look at page 59.
Denny Paul, I was also going to interject that those kids who are in like behavioral institutes and places like that, you need to also discuss and have in place behavior plans, or even plans for them to get some kind of, whether it's mountain comp, those kind of things that are coming in. Those conversations have to happen during that time too.
Yes, they do. And that's a great point. And as a matter of fact, I had that same conversation with the teacher this morning when we're talking about documenting in the conference summary, proposing or providing the evidence and the decision. But if we're having a placement change, if the student's going to a more restricted environment, we need to address the reasons, and we need to be doing something different than what was going on before, because there's a reason why we're restricting that environment. And that when you talk about those reasons, and we'll look at some of those reasons in just a second, but when you talk about the reasons that you're going to document the selection of the least restrictive environment by the committee, it certainly has to have reasons, and there has to be some treatment of the behavior. Like you said, Stephanie, that's a great point. Now, what she's got on the screen here is what I like to refer to. And lots of times when I do sticky notes and I'm looking at the LRE section on the IEP, and I've got a screenshot later, I'll show you. But when we're looking at that section, there's a certain way to write. Now you can write it out longhand. That's perfectly okay. But I prefer the bulleted. I prefer the visual friendly. I really prefer the way they're choosing to use the semicolon there. Special education language arts, co-teaching language arts. It's visually easy to see, and then whatever you put up there, whatever services they're getting that are they're being pulled away at any point, or they're receiving services in the regular classroom with co-teaching, you've got to make a designation about what that is. And so when we go on down, I think, Stephanie, you can go on down to, you're going to see it's going to be a spreadsheet. There you go. So what I'm getting at is whatever you write up there, whatever you've put in that are special ed services, where the students not want to be with their disabled or non-disabled peers, when they're going to be with their non-disabled peers, they're going to be in co-teaching settings. But when they're being pulled out and they're receiving services, we need to make sure that we're making those two things match. Okay. So if we're doing co-teaching in regular ed, we're still going to have a spot down here, and it's going to say general education classroom co-teaching, and it's going to tell what content area. Then if we do a resource room, you see that the content area is still there. So when we review files, we're looking to see, does the statement in the LRE match what's being documented here in the location? Because like we said, it's not a place, but it is a location of where you're going to receive the services here. And that's not decided until we know what the needs are. Okay. So we have an old phrase, IEP needs drives placement, drives LRE. And that all kind of works together, and it has to be documented correctly. So we can go back to slideshow now for a second. Let's go right on to the next slide. So here's what the Kentucky Administrative Regulation says about LRE. It shall ensure to the maximum extent appropriate. See that language? Comes straight out of the law. This is straight out of the law. Children with disabilities, including children placed by the LEA in public or private institutions or other care facilities are educated with children who are non-disabled. And I always, whether I'm teaching a college class or whether I'm doing a training with teachers, I'm talking to directors, whoever, whatever venue or whatever audience I'm talking to, I'm always going to add right on the end of that. I like to do it this way. It's just my little pet peeve. An LEA shall ensure to the maximum extent appropriate, children with disabilities, including children placed in the LEA in public and private institutions, are educated with their non-disabled peers to the maximum extent appropriate, right? So we want to make sure that we're making individual decisions, that we're not presupposing that everybody's going to go in co-teaching just because we said they were, because it's illegal to do that. So we need to be thinking about the continuum placement options. And part 2 of this law says an LEA shall ensure that a continuum of alternative placements is available to meet the unique needs of the students with disabilities. I threw unique in there because that's the Andrew language for special education related services. The continuum shall include the alternative placements of instruction, regular class, special schools, home instruction, and instruction in hospitals and institutions. And for whatever reasons, least restrictive at the top, more restrictive at the bottom. And then when you get more restrictive, you got to think about potential harm. So in determining the educational placement of a child with a disability, the LEA shall ensure that the placement decision is made by the ARC in conformity with these least restrictive environment provisions. So what all that means is you can't predetermine this. It's driven by the needs of the student. And if they need to be in a special class, we have to provide that special class as an alternative placement option for that particular need. And so that's one thing that we want to get across. We can go on from the law.
Denny Paul.
I'm a law geek. Question?
I just wanted to make a statement. I usually thought about this as a process of elimination. I start with the general curriculum first. And where am I going to get that general curriculum? And can my student get that general curriculum with a co-taught classroom? Because like we said, we're going to have to give them something, right, at this point. But then are they going to need more? And then can I provide that in a resource room? And so we continue down that track and looking at that, because my student may be able to get that fine and dandy in, let's say they're getting reading, they're great in a regular classroom. They may just need a few things, but they're really struggling with math. So maybe they need a few minutes in the resource room for math. And so we have to look at that exactly where they need to be. Now, if I've got a student whose IQ is very low, they have trouble with social, then I may look at even farther down with some special class, but I want to get them out socially as much as I possibly can. So where can I do that? Looking to push them in
to include. We want to be inclusive as we can, and it needs to make sense, and it needs to be the location where that student is going to thrive.
And can I actually document how that's going to happen for my student and why I'm choosing those? That all has to be included in there.
That's so important. And I think a discussion of that in the conference summary is key. We've developed a little acronym. Not that we don't have enough acronyms in special ed, but we came up with one on our own, just in our work. Proposal. So we're proposing a particular placement. Then we're going to provide the evidence or the reasons why we're doing what we're doing. This is what the kid can do, even though they have supplementary aids and services. Those combination of things that we provide, special design instruction, and all those bells and whistles that we provide, they still need the intensity, they need the different location, they need something a little different there. And so we're just saying you can't predetermine that's based on the student's needs and the student's needs alone on that particular IEP. And to finish my thought, proposal, evidence, decision, PED is the way we kind of look at our conference summary. So we're going to need to say, hey, we first considered full-time regular ed and as the environment, and we determined that based on the data, based on the evidence, based on what the student does, we had to move down to a more restricted environment because they needed some more things that we couldn't possibly provide. And it, like Stephanie says, it's not uniform, it's not nice and neat, it's individualized. And so that's very, very good comment. This slide just says IDEA 2004 requires, again, same definition. So this is from the Fed. This is, I just want to throw that in there. This is from the 2004 reauthorization of the law that these are either in public or private institutions or other care facilities, making sure that our students with disabilities are educated with non-disabled peers to the maximum extent appropriate. No more excluded, no more just saying, hey, we're going to put you down here because that's what's most convenient for the adults. Okay. It's not lawful. Okay. So let's move on. Again, this is the second part of that, special classes, separate schooling. Again, you can see that there's not much difference between the federal law and the state law. Now, the way the law works in this country, the feds set that law and they set kind of a baseline. And we can't take away from that baseline. We have to provide what that law says. We can do more in our attempt to apply that law. We can provide more at the local level, at the state level, but we can't take away from what that law says. So I just wanted to see the way the law is written. It's the same stuff. You see the special classes, separate schooling, other removal of children with disabilities from the regular ed occurs only once we've ruled out that the data tells us we've provided these services, these aids, these leveling of the playing field kinds of things, accommodations, if you will, modifications, if you will. We've provided all those things, but then we now see that the students still need special design instruction because there's an adverse effect on their educational performance. And we're going to have to adjust that environment a little bit. Okay. So that's the way we document it. So all schools are required to provide a free, appropriate public education. If you've had my trainings before, there's hardly ever a time that I provide a training with free, appropriate public education. So I want you just to consider that, what it means. I want to see what you think. This other acronym, FAPE, what does that mean? What is FAPE? And if you want to just kind of define that a little bit for us, and then we'll do the reverse waterfall activity again. We'll talk to you in a minute. Let's resume. Let's do a countdown. We're going to put it in the chat now. We're going to put our answers in chat. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You can drop them in there. Let's look at it. Let's look at what everybody says, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. It requires schools to provide special education to meet the unique needs of the student by providing those services, Amber McCarty says. We appreciate that. In the least restrictive environment as possible, right? So, FAPE is an acronym that, is very much in the forefront of what we do. We provide FAPE. How do we prove it? We have to document. How do we prove it? We have to progress monitor. And so there's a little bit more to it than just saying that's what we're doing. In the old days, we could get by with that. Just say this is what we're doing. And it was okay. But the litigation is such now that you have to show me, okay? You have to show me the evidence for everything you do with the kid, okay? So important. So Steph Kidd says free education, best possible placement for the student with their peer learning the way they would learn best with differentiated instruction, accommodations, modifications that provide them the access and to the general curriculum. So we're providing free and appropriate public education to every child in the LRE. All great answers. A free education, Connor Jacobs says, and that previous answer was Christy Combs. Thank you, Christy. And then a free education that meets the students' needs that are identified and the standards and is available to the general public. The LRE is an important factor in assuring that the education plan is appropriate for the student. Very good, Connor. And Alice Likens says every child with an identified disability has the right to a free, appropriate public education. Good. And Chas Craft, providing students with the services, instruction, and supplemental aids they need to acquire skills to meet academic standards. Perfect. Is an education entitlement for all students that have a disability to get the education, the standards, and to meet the needs of the student, says Esther Wright from Pike County. And Tracy Turner, FAPE has to exist in order to provide a LRE for a student. Without the free appropriate part, many districts and parents couldn't offer the environments that provide things to make it the least restrictive. Students have to be provided with their own needs in order to move toward goals and needs. Very good. Everybody did a great job. Let's go on to the next slide. First and foremost, free means just that. We don't talk about any cost. We can't say LRE can't be provided because we don't have the money to provide it. That's where it kind of, that kind of piece is where it connects, right? The other thing we have to do is we have to be considerate of procedure. If our state procedures say that the student has goals and objectives, we have to write goals and objectives. We can't make those procedural errors. If the timeline says the student needs to have an annual review every 365 days, and we have to do certain things with that, that's what we have to do. What makes that's the public piece of it. Okay, we have to follow the provisions and the regulations and the rules of our state, and then it has to be an appropriate education. It has to be an education that meets the needs of the student. And what makes it appropriate is that we meet their unique needs. We address it where they are. We have to identify in the present level what their instructional level is. What are their needs behaviorally? What is it? The functions that what's the deficits in their function? Can they function in society? We have to address those things. And then, of course, with high schoolers, we have to look at post-secondary education because that is provision of the IDEA Law 2004. And so when we're thinking about how these two things intertwine, we can't provide a student with a least restrictive environment unless we know where they're working. We know what services they need. And then we have to describe that, and we have to make decisions based on what they need. Stephanie broke it down very, very vividly for you in reading and math. The same applies to function. The same applies to transition. It says the regulations say we have to have an annual review. So we have to document those things. The Andrew case taught us some things about appropriateness. When we talk about appropriate, we're talking about is the benefit that's being gained from the IEP. Now, the IEP is not the entire curriculum, but the benefit being gained from that, we have to have some evidence that shows that the student is making progress in light of their unique circumstances. The way to do that, the best way to do that is progress monitoring. Okay. We also have a provision that says we need to improve our inclusion of parents in the development of the IEP. So we need to capture in a conference summary how we've included those parents in the development by asking them open-ended questions that speak to the IEP. What do you think your student needs to be working on? If you don't have that in your conference summary, I mark you off on item number, whatever it is. I think it's like 47 or something. It's one of those last few. It talks about ESY. You have to have progress monitoring to answer ESY, and you have to ask parents open-ended questions, regardless of what they say to you. Ask them the question, stated in your conference summary. You ask the question and then capture the response. So FAPE is an individualized education program that's designed to meet the unique needs of the student and to make sure that the student receives educational benefit. Now, this extended the Raleigh case, okay? The Raleigh case didn't go away. The Raleigh case is one of those Supreme Court cases that said the student needs to make some measurable progress. Minimum, maybe. De minimis, yes. But that was in light of that student's particular circumstance. That student was a high functioning student that had a hearing impairment. Now we're talking about, with Andrew, we're talking about a student that has much more issues, and we have to do an appropriate, ambitious goal, and we have to deliver it where it needs to be delivered. So cost is out, administrative convenience is out, and here are the principles. FAPE must be provided to every student with an IEP, and FAPE must be delivered in the LRE as per the ARC team. That's what we call them in Kentucky. Now, in the regulation, it says IEP team, right, in the federal regulation. But we, in Kentucky, we call our IEP teams ARC teams, ARCs, Admissions Release Committee teams. Students with disabilities will not be removed from regular education classes merely because of the severity of their disability. If it's more appropriate, like Stephanie was saying, for them to be in a class where they're receiving some interaction with their peers, that are not disabled, then that's what we need to be doing. So we have to mix and match and meet those unique needs and provide ambition in the goal, ramp the rigor up, push the student to make some progress, and progress monitor it, and then capture what the parents want. When students with disabilities, that's another acronym, will not, including students with significant cognitive disabilities, need specially designed instruction, or SDI, or supplementary aid and services, SAS, to benefit from participating in regular education classrooms as required in the IEP. Local education agencies are obliged to ensure that those services are provided. And we can move on. And here's some other principles about FAPE. ARC teams must determine whether the goals in the student's IEP can be implemented in a regular classroom with supplementary aids and services before considering removal from the regular ed environment. Big piece of considering what least restrictive environment means is we have to consider first regular ed, and then we give them the supplementary aids and services, and we see what the data tells us. And then if they need a more restrictive environment, we move them. And we got to capture and document that all in the conference summary. Is it with the appropriate supplementary aids and services piece, which may allow a student to make progress? Have we considered all those things that a student may need? Cost is out the window. What are the things they may need? Like if a kid can't communicate, what is it we do for them? Do we continue to teach them speech and provide speech? Maybe, but is there some devices that we need to think about because the student's been in the school for a lot of years? That's the things that we have to think about. And so school districts should consider the full range of supplementary aid services in regular education classrooms before we decide to restrict. And as we restrict, we got to consider, is that going to cause any harm? And we got to have a plan to address that harm if we consider that a potential possible. And we document that. We can go to the next, step.
Jenny Paul, I am going to say this much, and I'm sorry about the background noise, but the one thing it says that we can't do less, that really needs to be kept in mind, that we can't do less than what IDE already has provided for us.
So some questions around LRE. Here are the key questions for IB teams or ARC teams, whichever you prefer there, with regard to the least restrictive environment. What can be done to allow a child to remain in the general classroom and receive special design instruction by adapting the content, methodology, or delivery of instruction to ensure access to the general ed curriculum? Each section of the IEP provides invaluable information that supports opportunities for conversation around access, participation, and progress in the general education curriculum. So when you see all that, FAPE just jumps in my head. All right, you're providing FAPE here. The access is a 504 thing. We take care of access lots of times by considering the standards, considering how far the student is along in those standards. And we provide accommodations to reach those content standards that are grade level. But we write IEP goals on that student's particular level. That's why it's so important in present level to develop the instructional level of the student academically, so that we know our starting point and where we're headed and how far we are away from what's expected for that. Now, supplementary aids and services can help us. You know, they can provide us with things like pencil grips, or they can provide us with assistive technology that's even more technologically advanced, like, you know, a PEX system, or Dynavox, or you might have, some highlighted text even, or you might have, expanded size or font of the text. It just depends, but you got to do all that and then see, does the student need a more restricted environment? And so that's something to think about. We can move on. So especially at design instruction versus supplementary aids and services. This is straight really from the lesson plan development handbook. I'm not, I want you to be aware of this thing because it's excellent. If you're looking at the definition, SDI is what the teacher does different in instruction methodology, content delivery for students with disabilities, and SAS are what the student needs to make progress in the general curriculum. That supplementary aids and services is an amalgamation of all specially designed instruction and all those assistive technologies, all those services that we provide, related services, whatever it is. that we do. But this is a nice, you can go back to it, Steph, if you want to. Yeah, you can pull that back up and we can just take a peek at it real quick. I just want everybody to be aware that first page right there, special design instruction, supplementary aid services, there's a great explanation of explicit instruction, scaffold instruction, strategy instruction, direct instruction. There's all kinds of things in there. But what I really wanted you to see from this is the difference. Now, there, you can go on down just a little bit. Okay, we're going to get to a place where it says, you can see that multiple means for practice opportunities. This is all great information about how you should be doing specially designed instruction. And then there's that K section tells you what supplementary aids and services are. There's a great definition. It's any service or aid and other supports that are provided in the regular classroom or other education related settings to enable the child with disabilities to be educated with non-disabled peers. So you can see how those supplementary aids come into play with LRE. We have to diagnose, we have to pick and choose, and we have to provide the right mix of things for a student. We can't predetermine that. We have to know what the IEP says. We have to know what the data says, and we have to test scores say. Now, when you're looking at specially designed instruction, if you can honestly, it's arranged in such a way that if you're thinking about math calculation and reasoning, Stephanie goes to that right away because she's a math specialist. Great job. All right, leave it right there. That's perfect. But when you're looking at that, it's what the teacher does. So you see the things that the teacher does in specially designed instruction, and then the things that you can provide the student that are supplementary aids and services that work together. So all that together is all supplementary aids and services. It's all that. So if you had a Venn diagram or a visual here, you know, all of that would be an amalgamation of all those things together, supplementary aids and services, but you have to pair out what special design instruction is. Let me give you an example. If you've got a student that needs to use a Dynavox because they cannot make they've got apraxia, they cannot make the motor movements in their mouth to make the sound come out so that you can understand them. Do you just give them the Dynavox and say good luck? No, you've got to think about what special design instruction you need to design around the use of that Dynavox. You know, the committee has to make a decision when that's appropriate for that student. And so we wouldn't just say, you know, we're just going to give you everybody gets Chromebook now. Okay. Never been exposed to a Chromebook, never used a Chromebook, don't even know how to turn a Chromebook on. Is it our responsibility then to teach the students how to use those? Yes, that's the specially designed instruction part. And the aid and service is the device itself. You see the difference? So that's really what we're talking about when we talk about specially designed instruction as opposed to supplementary aid services, and how those things kind of cross. And there's an explanation of that if you go on past this that kind of clears that all up. But this is a great resource for teachers. If you're struggling with the difference between specially designed instruction, it's that teaching that you're doing. It's those different methodologies, that different intensity that you're providing for that student's different than what they're getting in regular ed. And then the things that you're providing for them, what the student needs to make progress, is the supplementary aid and service. And that does include special design instruction and accommodations.
Denny, Paul,
Yes.
I just want to interject here. When I think about my specially designed instruction, I think about, because I'm the one as a teacher that's going to be providing that. Where is the best possible place for me to provide that instruction for that student to truly get what they need to be able to access that curriculum that we were talking about? And then I think about what are the supplementary aids and services that student's going to use. Now, are they going to use a mnemonic strategy? What are they going to do that's going to provide them with the best opportunities for them to connect? Now, if I'm going to use cubes, I'm going to just use that for an example, then they have to understand that mnemonic. They had to know when to use it and how to use it. So where am I best going to be able to teach that? If I'm going to use algebra blocks, am I going to be able to do that in the regular classroom with that student for them to be able to understand and use those algebra blocks to the best of their abilities and to understand that curriculum? So we have to look at, as a teacher, what's the strategies that I'm going to be using with my students? What's those supplementary aids and services that I'm going to be providing them? And where is the least restrictive environment that I can provide those supplementary aids and services and that specially designed instruction?
Absolutely.
So it all ties back in, and you need to have your progress monitoring to determine those things.
Right. Yeah, it's not just by chance. You don't just decide it by chance. It's all driven by data and evidence. Okay, so let's move on the next slide. There's your continuum placement options. We've already hit that, but I just felt like I probably need to throw that in there so you can see that. And then, of course, we've talked about the 4 or 5 places where if you throw related services in with it, where those things have to mesh and meet. Okay, we can go on past that. There's the statements. There's a little screenshot from the IEP guidance document that gives you 2 options for documenting the LRE on the IEP. And so that's very important. And then there's the screenshot for where it's got to match. It's got to match in that location section. And notice, here's the mistakes that people make. You cannot put either or. You've got to put for that amount of service that you're doing special design instruction, there's got to be a location and a content area. And you can see down here for social skills instruction, if you're doing that, there's got to be a slot for it. Okay. And you got to tell exactly where it's happening. You can't say, well, one day it's going to happen in the regular ed, and one day it's going to happen in the resource room, and one day it's going to happen in the service station. You can't do that. It's got to be a succinct location with the content area. Okay. So we can move on from that. All right. And I linked you a couple of things here that I want to get to real quick before we get done. Placement options. This one's helpful because we have this is a draft, but it really is good. It talks about the reasons why you select the placement options on the conference summary. If in your mind's eye, if you can think about page 2 of the conference summary, and if you'll go on down, I'll show them what we're talking about. Go on, yeah, right there. Okay, so here's the placement options considered. This is what we're considering. This is what we're proposing. And if you pull them out any at all, you're going to drop down to the second box. Okay, so part-time, part-time. If you pull them for any amount of time that you've put over there on those services page on your IEP, then you need to understand that the draft here is speaking to what are the reasons why we're providing it where we're providing it. Okay, we've got to identify those reasons. All right, so if we've got a student in a full-time general education classroom with co-teaching, and we're not ever pulling them out to any resource, we're never pulling them out to counseling, we're never pulling them out to related service, we're never pulling them out at all, then you can stay in that first block. Okay, and you can check yes, and you can put statements in there, and there's some good statements in here that kind of make it make sense. It's statements about environment, it's about distraction, it's about pacing, it's about the opportunity for practice, immediate feedback. There's all kinds of things, that reasons in here why, but you've got to decide those reasons. Now, when you jump down and you say, let's say you said no here, you have to still say the reasons why you didn't select it. Even with the use of supplementary aids and services, it was not restricted. It didn't provide the environment where we could get the job done and provide the benefit. So we go down to the second when we check yes. Once we check yes, stop. Don't go to the next one. You don't have to fill it all out. Okay. You only have to, once you check yes, you start at the top. Remember, in your documentation and conference summary, you're considering regular ed first, full time. Then when you come down here, once you check yes, and you stop and you don't do anything else. Okay. So if you go on down to the next page there, you're going to see some reasons. Due to her disability adversely affecting her organizational skills, Susie requires explicit instruction in the use of an agenda, note-taking, and instruction in the organization of materials and assignments. When special design instruction and SAS is provided in the general ed setting, progress data indicates Susie accesses the core content through adult and peer models. Okay, that's perfect reasons why we would accept and keep her in that placement. We go on down to the next one. We've moved down to the second one. We got supplementary aids and services. For example, the text reader included within Anita's IEP will provide academic benefit in the regular ed setting for her to make progress in the general curriculum and socially interacting groups. The intensity level of instruction for language arts in a special class will provide opportunities to accelerate her learning by explicit instruction and hitting those phonemic awareness, phonics, and paragraph development through small group and one-to-one instruction. So you're telling the reasons why you're restricting the environment. You got to provide those reasons when you document. So key. So key. Okay, we can go on down to the next one. Just want to provide you with a little extra here. All right, this one's talking about progress data that Tim benefits most from a small group delivery. See how they access that progress data? They're using evidence that says this is where it's best happening at. Okay, this is why we're moving the kid down to this. This is why we're pulling them out for a part of the day. This is why they're not with their non-disabled peers, because that's what you're explaining, and you got to prove why you need to do that. Okay, all right, we can move on down. Right here's one for behavior. Nikki was unable to maintain appropriate behaviors within the general ed classroom, so we moved to the next one. And when we got in this highly structured environment, she needed intense behavioral supports and special design instruction that includes explicitly taught decision-making process for appropriate social behaviors, multiple reminders to use coping techniques, and a space for non-exclusionary timeout. That's why we moved her. That's the reasons. Okay. Now, remember, as we move down, as we continue to move down the placement options, we get to a section where, and the rest of those are just examples, but we get to where we need to, we can go back to the slideshow for a second, but there is a down the page here on down. This is my South Bend location. On down just a little bit, Steph, if you don't care. On down, it's going to say potential harmful effect. On past that, right. Let's see, right here, harmful effects. And so you can see some of the things that might be a harmful effect if you restrict that down to, a kid's in the resource room for more than 80% of the day. That's a restrictive environment. Okay. What are some of the things that are going to be manifested for that student? May not have enough support services to make progress on the IEP. We'll miss instruction in the general ed setting. Maybe it's missing some of those key pieces of the content delivery. We'll have limited opportunities for contact, socialization with non-disabled peers. We'll have limited opportunities for instruction, socialization into general ed with non-disabled peers. So we got to think about what the effects is on that student. We can go back out of that now, but that's just a link there for you. That's the South Bend site that I use all the time. As we recap, just thinking about least restrictive environment and how that intercedes with FAPE and how that is to be documented. So important. We get dinged over that very thing a lot by the State Department. It'll say the services page does not match the least restrictive environment. The placement options are, the reasons are not there for the restriction of the environment, or we didn't address potential harmful effects. Now it's perfectly okay sometimes to say, you don't think there's going to be any potential harmful effects. You can mark that and move on. But as you restrict, the intent, the propensity for that potential goes up. So just keep that in mind. As you head to the end of school, please be safe. Remind your students to be safe. A lot of travel, a lot of end of the year things going on. It just seems to be a time that we just have to be real vigilant with our students. And I would implore you to do that and keep yourself safe. And we'll see you next time around. Thank you all so much.